Hello, everyone. This is Mrs. G's Storytime, and we are reading Treasures of the Snow by Patricia Sanjan with permission of Moody Publishing Company. And we are reading Chapter 22, Lucien Finds Monsieur Gavette. Monsieur Gavette woke very early, and the first thing he thought of was that the storm had stopped and the valley was still. The second thing he remembered was that he was going home today. He was glad he was going home. He had been ill and had come up to the mountain for a week's rest and mountain air. Now he felt strong again, ready for work, and today he would travel on the early train and reach his lakeside home before midday. And what a welcome there would be. What a noise the children would make. He smiled as he thought of them. He had 2 boys and 2 girls who wore their poor mother out, and he wished he could find someone who could help her with them. He got out of bed and whistled while he shaved, and just as he was finishing, there was a knock on the door. "Come in," called Monsieur Gavette, surprised, for it was much too soon for the early breakfast he had ordered. It was only 5:30. The door opened and the night porter came in. He looked as though he had some rather mysterious news. "Excuse me, sir," he began, tilting his head to one side, "but you haven't by any chance expecting a visitor?" "A visitor?" echoed Monsieur Gavette, even more surprised. "At this hour and this weather? I certainly am not." "Well, sir," said the porter, "it's like this. Just a quarter of an hour ago I heard a little tap on the door, and when I opened it, there on the steps stood a boy on skis. About 12 years old, sir, white as a sheet and looking more like a ghost than a boy. 'I want Monsieur Gavette,' he said, without even stopping to say good morning. Then he sat down on the step and leaned his head against the doorway. 'Well,' I said to him, 'you can't come calling on people at this hour of the morning, laddie. He's asleep in his bed.' 'I'll wait then,' he said, and his head sunk down onto his knees. Well, I don't like to see a child like that, so I took off his skis and dragged him in and sat him on a chair. 'Where have you come from?' I asked him. 'From Pierre d'Or,' he said. 'How's that?' I asked. 'The early train isn't in yet.' 'I came over the pass,' he said. And, monsieur, the more I look at that boy, the more I feel like believing him. He's sitting down in the hall now. And when I passed your door, sir, I saw the light on, and I thought I'd come in and ask if you'd like to see him.' 'I'll come in and see him, certainly,' answered Monsieur Gavette, 'but I really can't believe that the story about him coming over the pass. I don't believe the mountain guides themselves would have crossed that last night. It must have been terrible up there.' The porter shrugged his shoulders and led the way downstairs. When they reached the hall, they both ran forward with a cry of dismay. The boy had slithered off the chair and lay in a dead faint on the floor. His face looked strangely white. Monsieur Gavette picked up the unconscious child in his arms. 'I'll take this boy to my room,' he said to the alarm porter. 'You bring me some hot water bottles and some brandy and coffee, and be as quick as you can.' Upstairs in his room, he laid the boy on his bed, removed his sodden boots and socks, and rubbed his numb feet. Then he took off his snowy clothes and wrapped him in blankets. And by this time the night porter had arrived, puffing very hard with the bottles and the brandy and the steaming coffee. Monsieur Gavette arranged the bottles and held a teaspoon of brandy to Lucien's white lips. He did not open his eyes, but gave a tired sigh and swallowed the brandy. 'That's right, laddie,' said Monsieur Gavette. 'You'll soon be all around.' When Lucien opened his eyes a few minutes later, he looked straight up into a kind brown face and couldn't think where he was. He felt so warm and comfortable and sleepy. He thought he would never want to move again as long as he lived. But he would like to know who this man with the kind brown face was, who looked at him so closely. 'Who are you?' he murmured. Monsieur Gavette didn't answer at once. He raised Lucien's head and gave him hot coffee. Lucien swallowed very slowly because it seemed too much of an effort to swallow just at that moment. When he finished, he said again, 'Who are you, and where am I?' 'I'm Monsieur Gavette,' replied the doctor. I don't know you, but I understand you wanted me.' Lucien stared at him rather stupidly. He had been so tired that he had almost forgotten what he had come for. But with the warmth and the food, things were beginning to get clear again, and at last he spoke. 'You are a great, clever, famous doctor?' 'No, I'm just a doctor.' But can you make lame children walk?' 'Well, it depends on why they're lame. Sometimes I can.' 'He's lame because he fell over a cliff. He walks with a crutch and a big boot.' Who does? Asked the bewildered Monsieur Gavet. Little Danny Bernier. He's 6. He lives in the chalet next to mine, and I came to ask if you would make him well. I've got enough money to pay you. How did you hear of me? My sister told me about you last night. My sister is a maid here. How did you get here in that storm? I came over the pass on my skis. You couldn't have done that, boy, not in that blizzard. But I did. There's no other way to come. And it was quite true. Monsieur Gavet sat looking at the boy as though he were something from another planet. As the doctor stared, Lucien's hand crept under his shirt he was still wearing and took out the fat stocking. Please, sir, he said, would this be enough to make him better? Monsieur Gavet emptied the sock, and cried in astonishment. Boy, said Monsieur Gavet quite gently but very firmly, before we go any further, you must tell me where you got all this money from. Do you know how much there is here? No, Lucien said rather drowsily, but my sister said you'd want a lot. Is it enough? That depends on whether you want to buy my clinic as well, replied the doctor. It's far too much. Where did you get it from? An old man I'm friends with gave it to me, murmured Lucien, who felt he could not keep his eyes open another minute. And there was another message. He said it was a payment of a debt, and you were to take it all. Who was this old man? Asked Monsieur Gavet. Just tell me that, and then you shall go to sleep. What is his name? Please, sir, I don't know. Where does he live? He made me promise not to tell you. With that, Lucien's eyes closed and his head rolled over to one side, and he fell fast asleep. Monsieur Gavet was in rather an awkward situation. His train was due to leave in 3/4 of an hour, but the boy lying on the bed had risked his life to come to him. It might be all for nothing, but he couldn't disappoint such a brave child by refusing to see the little cripple. Yet the lad would probably sleep for hours now. He left the room softly, went downstairs to the telephone, and rang his wife. Are you there, Marthe? He began. Darling, I'm so sorry, but I shan't be home until tomorrow. Such a strange thing has happened. And he told her the whole mysterious story. As he left the office, he nearly knocked over a red-eyed, pale-faced girl in outdoor clothes. She caught hold of his hand. Oh, sir, she cried, Porter tells me you've got my little brother safe upstairs. Mother and I thought he was dead in the drifts. I must go home quick and tell my mother he's here. Monsieur Gavet sat down beside her on the sofa and tried to get some sort of explanation out of her, but she could talk of little but the terrible night she and her mother had passed through. Marie could tell Monsieur Gavet very little about Danny. She was too upset to work, and now that she knew Lucien was safe, she was in a hurry to take him home. She would telephone the post office now, and they would get a child to run up the mountain with the news so that her mother would hear more quickly. But Monsieur Gavet would not hear of Lucien going home just yet. Marie could go home by herself, and when Lucien woke, he would bring him on the train. Marie had better get someone to send a mule sled to the station, as Lucien would probably be too stiff to walk. Maria agreed to everything and made off as fast as she could while Monsieur Gavet went back to his room. Lucien still lay just as he had left him, with his cheek resting on his hand, and there was a faint tinge of color in his face. He looked much better. Monsieur Gavet sat down and watched him and wondered again how the boy got all that money. Who was the old man who'd sent such a strange message? The payment of a debt. Monsieur Gavet decided to look into the matter very closely. Lucien woke about midday and once again could not remember where he was for quite a long time. He was aching all over and didn't want to move. Monsieur Gavet heard a little movement and came to see what was happening. Well, he said kindly, how do you feel? All right, thank you, answered Lucien, and then he remembered that he'd been to sleep and added worriedly, Will you have time to see the little boy I told you about, sir? Yes, said Monsieur Gavet, sitting down beside him. We'll go after dinner. I'll ring now for them to bring up dinner for 2, and while we eat, you can tell me all about this little boy and all about this old man who you say sent the money. I can't tell you about the old man, sir, replied Lucien, because I promised not to. He's a sort of a secret, and no one ever goes to see him except me. He said I was just to tell you that it was a payment of a debt, and nothing else at all, sir. He's been so kind to me, and I wouldn't break my promise. All right, said Monsieur Gavet. You shan't break your promise. I won't ask you anything more about him. Tell me about this little cripple. When did he hurt himself and how did it happen?" Lucien went very red, and he didn't answer for a few minutes. He didn't want to tell his new friend what had really happened, but as Monsieur Gavette would be sure to find out from the Bernays, it might be better if he heard it first from Lucien. He replied, "It was my fault, really. It was last spring, and I was teasing him. I pretended to drop his kitten over the ravine, and then my mistake, I really did drop it. Danny tried to rescue it and fell and hurt his leg, and since then he's never walked properly, only with crutches. And I thought, perhaps—" His lips trembled and his voice trailed off miserably into a whisper. But he had said enough, for the doctor loved and understood children. In those few broken sentences he had understood the whole story. He knew that this tired boy laying on the bed had been punished very bitterly. "Lucien," he said, "we'll see this child together. It may be that God is going to make you the means of curing him. You know, Lucien, you have a great deal to thank God for. I think he must have been looking after you in a very special way last night, or you would have never come across the pass alive." "Yes, I know," answered Lucien, shyly and eagerly. "You see, only yesterday I prayed that God would make Danny better. And then when I heard about you, I thought it was the answer. And when I got to the forest, I felt frightened and nearly went back. But I remembered something I heard at Christmas, and I thought I'd go on instead." "What did you remember?" asked Monsieur Gavette gently. "I remembered some verses in the Bible that Danny's grandmother read to us," answered Lucien slowly. "I can't remember it all, but it said that perfect love drives out fear. And grandmother said Jesus' love was perfect, so I wasn't afraid and I went on. I can't remember much about the journey, but I got here safely." "Yes," replied Monsieur Gavette, "I don't think anything but perfect love of the Lord Jesus could have sheltered you in that storm, or guided you on the right road, or kept you from being too afraid to go on. He's been very, very good to you, Lucien. Let's thank him now before our dinner comes." Lucien buried his face in the pillow, and Monsieur Gavette knelt by the bed and prayed. He thanked God for his perfect love that is stronger than storm or blizzard, which had guided Lucien's steps through the darkness and saved him from fear and death. And then he prayed for little Danny, that God would give him, the doctor, skill to heal that lame leg. Lucien, with his face in the pillow, prayed as well, only not out loud. "Lord Jesus," he cried in his heart, "you were near me on the mountain and I wasn't afraid. Don't go away again. I want to open my door like Annette did. Please come in." Tomorrow we'll read chapter 23, Danny Meets the Doctor. I love you and I'm praying for you, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.